Imagine looking up at the night sky and wondering if something has been silently watching Earth for thousands of years. Not a NASA satellite, not a Soviet satellite, not some modern piece of junk tumbling through orbit. Something older, something darker, something unknown. According to one of the internet's most persistent space mysteries, there may be an object orbiting Earth that does not belong to us. Some call it an ancient alien probe. Some say it has been circling the planet for 13,000 years. Some believe NASA knows exactly what it is and has spent decades covering it up. And others say the whole thing is nothing more than a strange pileup of misunderstood science, old newspaper stories, radio signals, space debris, and human imagination. Tonight, we're following the signal into orbit. This is the story of the Black Knight satellite. Alien probe, Cold War misunderstanding, are proof that once a mystery finds the right audience, it can become almost impossible to kill. Let's tune in. Somewhere between fact, folklore, and late-night speculation, there are stories that refuse to disappear, signals hidden in the noise, legends whispered in the dark, and mysteries that somehow feel stranger the deeper you dig. Welcome to Dead Signal Radio, strange stories from the edge of static. I'm Michael, and tonight we're talking about the Black Knight satellite, one of the strangest legends to ever drift through the world of UFOs, conspiracy theories, space exploration, and internet rabbit holes. So dim the lights, look up at the sky, and maybe keep one eye on static. Because this story starts with the question, what if something was already up there before we were? The Black Knight satellite is one of those mysteries that sounds absurd the first time you hear it. And then, somehow, it gets even stranger the more you look into it. The basic claim is this. There's an unidentified object in orbit around Earth. Some versions of the story say it's artificial. Some say it's extraterrestrial. And some say it's been watching us for thousands of years. And some versions go even further, claiming the object is approximately 13,000 years old and may have originated from somewhere near the star system Epsilon Boötis, which is the kind of sentence that makes you either lean forward or close the laptop. Maybe both. Now, the Black Knight satellite is usually described as a dark, irregularly shaped object orbiting Earth in near polar orbit. In the legend, it's not just a piece of space junk. It's something deliberate, something placed there, something ancient, something watching. And that is why the story has survived for so long. Because the idea is powerful. A silent object above Earth, no clear owner, no clear purpose, no clear origin, just a shadow in orbit. That's an excellent setup for a mystery. The problem is that the Black Knight story is not really one story. It's a collection of stories. Different events, different claims, different eras, different people, different sightings, and different misunderstandings. Over time, all of those pieces were stitched together into one big legend. And that's important. Because when people talk about the Black Knight satellite, they often make it sound like there's one single mystery with one single trail of evidence. But what we really have is more like a junk drawer of strange space-age folklore. And I say junk drawer with affection. Every good mystery has one. There are mysterious radio signals. There are strange echoes. There are early satellite reports. There are UFO claims. There are NASA photographs. There's Cold War anxiety. It's alien speculation. And then somewhere in the middle of all that, the Black Knight was born. But to understand how this legend took shape, we need to go back before satellites. Before NASA, before Sputnik, before the space age really began. We need to go back to Nikola Tesla and some very strange signals. Nikola Tesla is one of those historical figures who has almost become two people. There's the real Tesla, brilliant inventor, electrical pioneer, eccentric thinker, a man whose work helped shape the modern world. And then there's Internet Tesla, wizard scientist, lost genius, possible alien contactee, a man who apparently invented every technology we have ever heard of, and several that probably only exist on YouTube thumbnails. As usual, the truth is interesting enough without turning him into a comic book character. In 1899, Tesla was conducting experiments in Colorado Springs. He was working with wireless transmission, electricity, and radio signals at a time when the field was still young and poorly understood. During those experiments, Tesla detected unusual signals. They seemed rhythmic, repeating, intentional. Tesla did not know what caused them. Eventually, he speculated that he may have come from another world. And eventually, he speculated that they may have come from another world. Mars was a popular candidate at the time. That may sound wild now, but in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the idea of intelligent life on Mars was taken much more seriously in popular culture than it is today. Astronomers had reported strange features on the Martian surface. Some people imagined canals, civilizations, dying worlds, messages from beyond. So when Tesla detected strange signals, the public imagination was already primed for the idea that maybe someone out there was trying to communicate. Now, modern explanations are much more granted. Tesla may have detected natural radio noise. He may have picked up signals from storms. He may have detected Earth-based interference. Some later speculation even suggests he could have been detecting cosmic radio phenomena that scientists simply did not understand yet. And here's the key point. Tesla did not discover the Black Knight satellite. He didn't name it. He didn't say, "Oh yes, a 13,000-year-old alien object is orbiting Earth." That connection came later. Much later. The Black Knight legend reached backward and attached itself to Tesla's strange signals. And that happens a lot with folklore. A modern legend finds an older mystery, grabs it by the collar, and says, "You're coming with me." That does not mean Tesla's signals are irrelevant. They matter because they help establish the mood of the Black Knight story. The first ingredient of this legend is not a photograph, it's a signal, a mysterious transmission, something detected but not understood. And for a show called Dead Signal Radio, that feels appropriate. Because once again, we find ourselves asking, who sent the signal? What did it mean? And were we ever supposed to hear it? After Tesla, another piece of the Black Knight legend comes from a strange radio phenomenon known as long-delayed echoes. A long-delayed echo is basically what it sounds like. So radio signal is transmitted, and then, after a strange delay, the signal appears to come back. Not instantly, not like a normal echo, sometimes seconds later. In the late 1920s, radio operators began reporting these unusual echoes. One of the names often connected to this story is Jorgen Haus, a radio operator in Norway who reportedly heard delayed echoes of shortwave signals in 1928. Now, long-delayed echoes are real phenomena. They've been reported and studied, but explaining them has always been tricky. Some possible explanations involve the ionosphere. Some involve magnetospheric effects. Some involve multiple propagation paths around the Earth. Some may involve equipment or observational issues. Radio's weird. Anyone who's ever messed with static, interference, or a station fading in and out knows that signals do not always behave in ways that feel intuitive. But for people interested in the Black Knight legend, long-delayed echoes became something more dramatic. What if the echoes were not just natural radio behavior? What if something in space was receiving Earth's signals and then sending them back? That's where things start to drift from science into speculation. And speculation, as we know, is where mysteries put on their good shoes and start walking. In the 1970s, Scottish writer Duncan Lunan analyzed long-delayed echoes and proposed a very unusual idea. He suggested that the echoes might represent a message from an alien probe. According to his interpretation, the probe could have come from the direction of Epsilon Buddhists and might have been around 13,000 years old. There it is. The big number. 13,000 years. That number becomes one of the most famous claims in the Black Knight legend. But there is a major catch. Lunan later backed away from his own conclusion. He said he had made errors and that the method he used was not scientifically sound. That's a pretty important detail. When the person connected to one of the most famous pieces of legend says essentially, yeah, this probably does not hold up, we should probably pay attention. But folklore does not always care about retractions. Once a detail enters the bloodstream of mystery, it can keep circulating for decades. And that's exactly what happened here. The 13,000-year-old alien probe idea stuck. Even if the foundation underneath it started to crumble. Because honestly, it's a good story. Mysterious object, ancient, orbiting, listening, possibly sending signals. You can see why people were drawn to it. It's hard to compete with that using something like unusual radio propagation. Accurate? Maybe. Dramatic? Not exactly. By the 1950s and 1960s, humanity was entering the space age. Satellites were no longer just theory, they were real. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, and suddenly the sky above Earth had changed forever. We'd crossed the line. Objects made by human hands were now orbiting the Earth, and that changed how people thought about everything. The sky was no longer just stars, clouds, airplanes, and imagination. Now it could hold machines. Secret machines, military machines, spy satellites, tracking objects, unidentified debris. And during the Cold War, that mattered. The United States and the Soviet Union were watching each other constantly. Every launch mattered. Every orbit mattered. Every object in orbit mattered. Every unknown object raised questions. In 1960, reports appeared about a dark object in orbit that some believed might be an unknown satellite. At first, speculation suggested it could be Soviet, and that would make sense for the time. A mysterious object in orbit during the Cold War? Of course people suspected Soviets. That was basically the default setting. But as more information came out, the object was connected to debris from a U.S. satellite program, not an ancient alien probe. Still, the idea of a dark, unknown companion orbiting Earth had power. Some versions of legend refer to this object as the Dark Companion, which, let's be honest, is a fantastic name. If you're trying to build a mystery, Dark Companion is doing some serious work. It sounds like either an alien satellite or the title of a prog metal album from 1974. Possibly both. But this is another point where the Black Knight story gathers material. A dark object, unclear reporting, Cold War secrecy, satellite tracking, speculation, confusion, and then, over time, it gets folded into the larger legend. Was this object the Black Knight? Was it an unknown satellite? Was it space debris? Or was it just a misunderstanding? The skeptical answer is that it was likely part of the messy early history of satellite tracking and space debris. But the mystery answer is more tempting. Maybe something was already there. Maybe the space age did not discover the Black Knight. Maybe it only noticed it. That's the kind of idea that keeps the legend alive. Eventually, the Black Knight satellite stopped being just a strange object. It became an alien probe. That's the version most people know now. A dark, ancient satellite of unknown origin, possibly orbiting Earth for 13,000 years, possibly sent by an extraterrestrial civilization, possibly observing humanity, possibly transmitting information back to whoever built it. And if all that sounds like a science fiction movie, yes, it absolutely does. That's part of the appeal. The Black Knight legend taps into several powerful ideas at once. First, the idea that we're not alone. Second, the idea that someone may have been watching us for a very long time. Third, the idea that governments may know more than they admit. And fourth, the idea that there are ancient mysteries hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to connect the dots. That last one is especially powerful. People love connecting dots. Sometimes it leads to real insight. Sometimes it leads to a corkboard covered in red string and a man in a gas station parking lot explaining that Bigfoot knows too much. There's a range. But the Black Knight theory has all the right ingredients for a classic conspiracy mystery. It involves space, it involves signals, it involves old scientific reports, it involves NASA, it involves possible cover-ups, it involves blurry or strange photographs, and it involves the possibility that Earth has had a silent observer for thousands of years. You don't have to believe it to understand why people want to. There's something oddly lonely and beautiful about the idea. A probe sent from somewhere unimaginably far away, crossing space, finding Earth, settling into orbit, watching oceans rise and fall, watching civilizations appear, watching us build fires, cities, radios, rockets, satellites, watching us finally look up and ask, what is that? That is a very powerful image. It may not be true, but it's powerful. And then, in 1998, the Black Knight legend got its most famous image. If you've ever seen a picture connected to the Black Knight satellite, it was probably from NASA's STS-88 mission. STS-88 launched in December 1998. It was an important mission because it was the first space shuttle mission to go to the International Space Station. During that mission, astronauts photographed a strange dark object floating in space. The object looks irregular, twisted, dark, almost organic. Not like a clean modern satellite, like a smooth piece of equipment. It looks like something that should not be there. And for Black Knight believers, this image became the smoking gun. Finally, there it was. The object, the mysterious satellite, photographed by NASA itself. Not a rumor, not a story, not a fuzzy eyewitness account. An actual image from space. And I'll say this, the photo does look weird. If you've never seen it, search for Black Knight Satellite STS-88 photo. You will understand immediately why people latched onto it. Floating against the darkness of space, the object has a shape that feels strange enough to spark imagination. It's not hard to see how someone could look at it and think, that does not look like a blanket. Because yes, that is the skeptical explanation. The object is widely explained as a thermal blanket that was accidentally lost during a spacewalk. During STS-88, astronauts were working on components of the International Space Station. A thermal cover reportedly got away from them. In space, even a piece of flexible insulation can look strange. There's no air resistance, no ground, no familiar scale, no normal sense of up or down. A blanket can tumble, twist, reflect light, and take on bizarre shapes. Against the blackness of space, even ordinary debris can look deeply unnatural. And that appears to be what happened. The object was cataloged as space debris and later burned up in Earth's atmosphere, which is a very normal ending. Almost annoyingly normal. Because lost thermal blanket burns up in atmosphere does not hit quite like ancient alien sentinel watches Earth for 13,000 years. But sometimes the boring explanation is the correct one. And this is where the Black Knight mystery becomes especially interesting, because the most famous evidence for the legend may also be the easiest piece to explain. But for believers, the explanation is not in the mystery. It just becomes part of the cover-up. That's the tricky thing about conspiracy folklore. If NASA says it was space debris, skeptics hear, well, that makes sense. Believers may hear, that's exactly what they would say. And once a mystery reaches that stage, it becomes very difficult to resolve. Because every explanation becomes suspicious. Every missing detail becomes evidence. Every ordinary answer becomes too convenient. And that does not mean believers are stupid. It just means the story has become emotionally satisfying. And emotionally satisfying stories are very hard to kill. So why does the Black Knight satellite legend survive? Why does the story keep coming back? I think there are a few reasons. First, it has a great visual. A dark object in orbit that is alone enough. That alone is enough. Humans are visual creatures. Give people a strange image and a mystery, and the story can travel forever. Second, it has history, or at least it feels like it has history. Tesla, radio signals, long-delayed echoes, Cold War satellite reports, NASA photos. All of these pieces give the Black Knight legend a sense of depth. Even if those pieces are not actually connected, they feel connected. And sometimes, for folklore, that's enough. Third, it involves institutions people already distrust. NASA, the military, the government, Cold War intelligence, space programs, classified technology. These are all areas where secrecy either existed or could plausibly exist. So when someone says they're hiding something, the idea does not feel completely absurd to people. We know governments keep secrets. We know militaries hide technology. We know classified programs exist. The question is not whether secrecy happens. It does. The question is whether this particular story has enough evidence to support its claims. And that is where the Black Knight starts to struggle. Fourth, the Black Knight feels a psychological need. It makes the universe feel less empty. Maybe we are being watched. Maybe we're not alone. Maybe humanity is part of a larger story. Maybe our little blue planet has been interesting to someone else for longer than we can imagine. That's a very compelling thought. A little creepy, a little beautiful, and a little unsettling. Very Dead Signal Radio, honestly. And fifth, the Black Knight is just vague enough to survive. It is not one clear object with one clear timeline. It's a legend made from fragments. That makes it flexible. If one piece gets debunked, believers can shift to another piece. Tesla signals? Maybe. Long-delayed echoes? Maybe. 1960 reports? Maybe. NASA photo? Maybe. Ancient alien probe? Maybe. The legend survives because it's not pinned to one thing. It is a cloud of mystery, and clouds are hard to shoot down. Now, let's bring this back to Earth, literally. Because while the Black Knight satellite is a fascinating story, the evidence for it being an ancient alien probe is extremely weak. The Tesla connection is interesting, but there's no solid evidence that Tesla detected a satellite. He detected strange signals. That part is real. But attaching those signals to the Black Knight is a much later interpretation. The long-delayed echoes are also interesting. They do not require an alien probe to explain them. They are strange radio phenomena. Strange does not automatically mean extraterrestrial. The 13,000-year claim largely comes through later interpretation, especially Duncan Lunan's speculative analysis, which he later backed away from. That's important. The 1960 satellite reports appear to have ordinary space-age explanations tied to human-made objects and debris. The British Black Knight rocket program is unrelated despite the name. The alleged Gordon Cooper sighting often appears in versions of legend, but there is no strong evidence in mission transcripts that the dramatic version actually happened. In the famous STS-88 photo, the best explanation is that it shows a lost thermal blanket. A weird-looking object? Yes. An alien probe? Probably not. So if we're scoring this fairly, the skeptical side wins on evidence. That does not mean the story is worthless. Actually, I think the opposite. The Black Knight satellite is valuable because it shows how modern mythology works. It shows how disconnected events can be pulled together into one larger narrative. It shows how old scientific uncertainty can become UFO folklore. It shows how a strange photo can give new life to an old legend. And it shows how badly we want the universe to be more mysterious than it sometimes appears. That, to me, is the real story. Not necessarily that an ancient alien satellite is watching us, but that we keep looking up and wondering if one could be. So what do I think? I don't think there's good evidence that the Black Knight satellite is a 13,000-year-old alien probe. I think the story is most likely a patchwork. Tesla signals, long-delayed echoes, Cold War satellite confusion, space debris, NASA photographs, internet speculation, all stitched together into one very compelling legend. But I also understand why the story sticks, because the Black Knight satellite lives in that perfect space between fact and imagination. There are real ingredients here. Real radio experiments, real unexplained signals, real historical reports, real space missions, real photographs. The leap happens when all of those ingredients get turned into one grand claim, that an alien object has been orbiting Earth for thousands of years. And that leap is where skepticism matters. Because mystery is fun, but not every mystery needs aliens to be interesting. Sometimes the more fascinating question is not, is the Black Knight real? Sometimes the better question is, how did so many unrelated stories become one legend? And that answer tells us something about ourselves. We are pattern-seeking creatures. We hear signals in the noise. We see shapes in the dark. We connect dots. We build stories. Sometimes those stories lead us closer to truth. Sometimes they lead us into the weeds. And sometimes they become legends. The Black Knight satellite may not be an alien probe, but as a piece of modern folklore, it is incredibly effective. A dark object a silent orbit, a century of strange signals, and a question that refuses to fully disappear. What if something is up there? Not because the evidence proves it, but because some part of us still wants to know. Well, that's all for tonight. Thanks for spending a little time with me here at Dead Signal Radio. If you enjoyed tonight's mystery, follow along for more strange stories, legends, and late night rabbit holes. Until next time, stay curious, and if you hear static, maybe listen a little closer.